What if not obsessing over sports isn't a lack of passion, but a sign of a different kind of intelligence? Most people assume that loving sports is universal, almost hardwired, but psychology tells a very different story. Some minds simply don't latch on to teams, scores, or rivalries, and that absence reveals something fascinating. Psychology and neuroscience reveal that people who don't obsess over sports often share distinct cognitive and emotional traits. In this video, you'll discover what research shows about attention, identity, and motivation, and why this difference is more meaningful than it seems. Stay until the end. The final insight reframes everything. People who don't obsess over sports often allocate attention differently. Instead of tracking scores, players, and statistics, their focus gravitates toward abstract ideas, personal projects, or internal states. Psychology reveals that attention is a limited cognitive resource. Research on attentional bandwidth shows that the brain prioritizes stimuli that align with intrinsic motivation. When sports don't activate that circuitry, attention naturally flows elsewhere. If this resonates, it actually suggests strong self-directed focus. Rather than being pulled by collective hype, the mind selects what feels meaningful. Think of attention like a spotlight. Some spotlights sweep crowds, others illuminate a single quiet stage. Next, there's something even deeper happening beneath that focus. Sports fandom often fulfills a psychological need for belonging. Teams become symbols of identity, us versus them. People who don't obsess over sports typically rely less on these external identity markers. Studies on social identity theory indicate that some individuals construct identity internally, rather than through group affiliation. Their sense of self is less dependent on shared rituals or collective wins and losses. If this sounds familiar, it reflects autonomy, not detachment. The self isn't outsourced to a logo or a color. Identity comes from values, curiosity, or personal meaning. But here's what most people miss. This independence changes how emotions are regulated. Sporting events are designed to amplify emotion, anticipation, elation, disappointment. People who don't obsess over sports often experience emotions with lower external volatility. Neuroscience suggests that repeated emotional surges strengthen certain neural pathways. When those surges aren't repeatedly triggered, the emotional system stays more even. This doesn't mean emotions are muted. It means they're less reactive to external outcomes. If sports highs and lows never felt appealing, it may indicate a preference for emotional stability. The mind favors depth over spikes, like choosing steady light instead of fireworks. Another sign shows up in how time is experienced. Sports obsession often centers on immediate outcomes, this game, this season, this moment. People who don't fixate on sports frequently think in longer timelines. Psychology research on time perspective shows that future-oriented thinkers invest mental energy into skills, ideas, and long-term goals. Immediate spectacle holds less pull when the brain is oriented toward what's next rather than what's now. If watching games feels unproductive or distracting, it doesn't signal disinterest in joy. It signals delayed gratification. The mind is quietly asking, what does this build toward? And that question connects to something surprisingly intellectual. Sports narratives are often binary, win or lose, hero or failure. People who don't obsess over sports tend to prefer complexity over simplicity. Studies indicate that individuals with a high need for cognition enjoy layered problems, ambiguity, and open-ended exploration. When outcomes feel predetermined or repetitive, engagement drops. If sports feel mentally understimulating, it actually suggests a craving for richer cognitive input. The brain wants puzzles, not scoreboards, systems, not standings. But there's a social side to this trait that's often misunderstood. For many, sports are social glue. Conversations, gatherings, and rituals revolve around them. People who don't obsess over sports often engage socially in more selective ways. Behavioral psychology shows that social energy is regulated much like physical energy. Some people spend it broadly, others invest it carefully. If sports-based socializing feels draining, it may be because connection is sought through depth rather than frequency. If relating through ideas or shared values feels more natural, that's not social avoidance, it's social precision. Now, here's where psychology enters the picture. Sports fandom offers clear external rewards: celebration, status, shared excitement. People who don't obsess over sports are often driven more by intrinsic motivation. Research shows that intrinsically motivated brains release dopamine from curiosity and mastery, not from applause. Satisfaction comes from understanding, creating, or improving, not from winning by proxy. If cheering for someone else's achievement never resonated, it suggests a self-referenced reward system. Fulfillment comes from participation, not spectatorship. And this leads to the most surprising insight of all. Self-concept clarity refers to how clearly and consistently a person understands who they are. Psychology indicates that people with high self-concept clarity rely less on external narratives to define themselves. Sports allegiances often provide ready-made stories: identity, loyalty, triumph. When those stories aren't needed, it points to a stable internal framework. If sports never became part of the self-story, it actually suggests a strong internal compass. Meaning isn't borrowed, it's generated. And this is why this difference matters more than it seems. Not obsessing over sports isn't a flaw, a gap, or a lack of passion. Psychology reveals it as a pattern, one shaped by attention, motivation, emotional regulation, and identity. These traits point toward independence of mind, depth of focus, and intrinsic meaning. If any of these insights resonated, they aren't signs of being out of sync. They're signs of a different psychological orientation, one that values internal clarity over external noise. If this perspective added value, subscribe for weekly psychology insights that help decode human behavior and self-understanding. The next video explores how quiet preferences often signal high emotional intelligence.